Hello, and welcome to Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And each week we invite you to send in your questions, and we'll explore the fascinating stories of the city of Mississauga together. Thank you for your question on Britannia United Church, and it truly is a historic church here in Mississauga. The Britannia United Church that you're asking about was originally known as the Britannia Wesleyan Methodist Church. And it is one of the last visible remnants of the lost village of Britannia, one of our little crossroads hamlets that once dotted across our city and became quite a building block for what became the city of Mississauga. And Britannia is one of those that has largely disappeared over time, although not completely. Nearby, a little bit to the south, you'll find the Britannia Schoolhouse, one of our last surviving, or one of our few surviving one-room schoolhouses, which still operates and offers programs to school children in the region of Peel. And just to a little bit south of that are a couple of historic houses associated with the Britannia Schoolhouse property, or the Britannia Farm, one of which was a farmhouse that was built in the 1850s, and the other one being a relocated house known as the Gardner Chisholm House, which is also part of the property and used by the Peel Board of Education today. But back to the church itself, again, a strong reminder of the lost village of Britannia, which was built around that intersection, Britannia Road and here Ontario Street. Indeed, Britannia Road takes its name because it once led to the village of Britannia. The church itself was, or the property that the church sits on actually was donated by an early settler who was named Joseph Gardner, and it was on his property, on a corner lot on his property, that the church and cemetery were built. And the property was donated in 1830, although there is reference to an earlier church known as Gardner Church, a little log church on the property, as possibly as early as 1821. The building you see today, the surviving building, was built way back in 1843, and there was a small addition to the back in 1869. The earliest documented burial in the cemetery that surrounds and behind the church is dated to 1837, although it is possible that there are earlier cemeteries that are unmarked by surviving gravestones. The property now recently was transferred to the city of Mississauga. So the church, looking for kind of a new purpose and possibly a new tenant, is owned today by the city of Mississauga, and care of the cemetery falls to the city as well. To give you a little bit of a timeline, so there's reference to a log church in this community in 1821. The cemetery site was established in 1830, although again the earliest reference to the earliest known record of a burial there was 1837. In 1843, a brick church, the current church you see today, replaced the earlier log church. The structure was enlarged and formally named the Britannia Wesleyan Methodist Church in 1864. Steel rods were installed in 1870 to tie the exterior walls together. You can still see those elements on the exterior of the building today. James Lougheed, who was a veteran of the War of 1812, was buried in the cemetery in 1872, and so he had a long life in this community, one of our veterans of the War of 1812 who once lived here. 1885, the church was redecorated with new oil lamps and chandeliers. 1897, a basement was excavated for the installation of our furnace in the church. 1910, the cemetery was enlarged. In 1922, interior remodeling, a balcony, new furnace, and new roof were added. In 1925, the Wesleyan Methodist congregation became part of the new United Church in Canada. So the Britannia Wesleyan Methodist Church becomes the Britannia United Church in 1925. Electricity was installed in 1927, and the iron fence that you see flanking the cemetery on each side of the church, it was added in 1949. The city in 1981 designated the building under the terms of the Ontario Heritage Act. And in 1996, the congregation had dwindled to the point that regular services ceased. And as I mentioned today, this wonderful hallmark to yesteryear, this beautifully heritage designated church built in 1843 is owned today by the city of Mississauga. So thank you for your inquiry, and I invite you to wander the cemetery and look at the gravestones and think of the early families who once settled here, whether it be historically the Gardner family and Browns and many others that are in the cemetery behind, and more recently someone like the Medill family who had such an impact on local history here in Mississauga, and particularly the community of Britannia. I invite you to check out a couple of local history books by Ben Medill, who was a longtime parishioner of the Britannia United Church and a champion of the Britannia Schoolhouse just down the road. So again, thank you for your question on the story of the Britannia United Church. Thank you for your question, Jim, on the Clarkson Refinery. And yes, it is still operating. The refinery itself has its origins on being established on November 18th of 1943 as the British American Oil Company refinery in Clarkson. And it was located on what was then Lakeshore Road, now an extension of Southdown Road as roads get reoriented and renamed over time. The property was largely owned, the property on which the refinery came to be built was largely owned at the time by Edward Orr. That's who Orr Road takes its name from. And it was on property once owned by the Marigold family way back when the Crown Grant was first granted 400 acres to the Marigold family, and this area became known as Marigold's Point, the predecessor of the community of Clarkson. When the new industry came in 1943, bringing with it or attracting a large workforce, it was necessary to find housing for the workforce. And the company actually built a company-owned village, which became known as Marigold Village. And it consisted of 50 2-acre homes on 50-foot lots to accommodate 200 adults and children, the families of those who worked at the refinery. Initially, the British American Oil Refinery produced wartime fuels, lubricants, and asphalt. The company transported its products to Toronto by freighter, except in the winter months, and when it went by rail or by truck. The refinery was eventually built into a conglomerate operation with numerous refining and storage facilities to keep up with the changing petroleum marketplace. In 1962, and the company's had many iterations and names over time, but in 1962, BA Oil merged with Royalite, and the amalgamation became known as BA Royalite for a time, which in turn bought out Imperial Oil and Shawinigan Chemicals Limited, and the United Company in 1969 became known as Gulf Oil Canada. Today it's known as Petro-Canada Lubricants, but the refinery still operates down in just south of the Clarkson area in Mississauga. Again, Petro-Canada Lubricants, who purchased the Gulf Oil Refinery in 1985. Petro-Canada dates back to 1975 when the company was originally created as a Crown Corporation. Became widely known throughout Canada, and has operates over 30 self-serve gas stations within Mississauga alone, let alone the rest of the country. One of the events that kind of shaped the identity of this company happened just more or less recently in 2003, when at 8:45 p.m. on August 22nd, 2003, there was a ground-shaking explosion and fire at the company. Local residents mistook the explosion for thunder. However, the sound was described as a sharp, loud crack and noise with a reverberation, a tremor in the ground and air, and it started to fire at the facility and quickly put out by local emergency response. But things like this are occasionally happen at industrial areas, but thankfully it was contained rather quickly. Petro-Canada merged with Suncor in 2009. and community involvement, always part of this company's engagement in Mississauga. But community involvement was something Suncor actively engaged in, and they have supported the Mississauga Waterfront Festival, the Credit Valley Hospital, Credit Valley Conservation, and Friends of the Museums, just to name a few. In 2012, Suncor partnered with the Riverwood Conservancy and the Friends of the Museums of Mississauga to support a multitude of community programs. By October 2016, Suncor had sold Petro-Canada to a Dallas-based Holly Frontier, which is currently the parent company, and today the refinery, the Petro-Canada Lubricants Refinery, produces a range of food-grade lubricants and machinery-focused oils. 2023, only a couple of years from now, will mark the 80th anniversary of the refinery in Clarkson. So something that truly has become part of the heritage of our city. A refinery operating for just shy of 80 years down on South Down Road in Clarkson. So Jim, thank you for your question. Thank you, Lauren, for your question on Dr. Moses. And yes, indeed, it does ring a bell. And the individual, in all likelihood, is referring to Dr. Moses Henry Aikens. And at one point in time, a local history written on the subject of medicine and doctors referred to him as the greatest son of Peel. So Dr. Moses Henry Aikens, we'll step back a generation first to set the scene for him. His father was James and his mother Anne Aikens, and they were natives of County Monaghan, Ireland. They immigrated to Philadelphia in 1816, but resettled here in historic Mississauga, then known as Toronto Township, in 1820. In 1847, James Aikens was granted 100 acres of land in Toronto Township, and the family made a great impact on the character of the new homeland. The story is that they were rented property before they were granted property, but they lived here from 1820 onwards. The father, and this paints the scene possibly for the character of the son Moses, but the father James was described, and I quote, "A man of most sober and exemplary character. The weight of his character placed him among the excellent of the earth. His words were few and seasoned with grace. His integrity was inflexible, and his influence was extensive." Now, I don't know if I've come across a finer quote of a character of an individual than that one. That was recorded by noted historian William Perkins Bull in the 1930s. James and Anne had multiple children, and they included the eldest son, the Honorable James Cox Aikens, who went into politics, John Aikens, a well-established farmer, Dr. William Aikens, Dr. Moses Henry Aikens, so two sons that went into the medical profession, Anne Jane Aikens, who passed away at a young age, and Eleanor Aikens, who married a local politician by the name of James Austin. Moses himself, Moses Henry Aikens, was one of several members of his family to achieve prominence. An elder brother and a nephew served in turn as lieutenant governors of Manitoba. They included the Honorable James Cox Aikens, who was lieutenant governor of Manitoba from 1882 to 1888, and Sir James Alexander Manning Aikens, who served as lieutenant governor of Manitoba from 1916 to 1929, both very prominent politicians. James Cox Aikens was in federal parliament during the Confederation years and serving as Secretary of State under Sir John A. Macdonald, our first Prime Minister. Moses himself, a younger brother of James Cox Aikens, was born on December 14th of 1832 in Burnhamthorpe, Ontario, and that's where the name Burnhamthorpe Road gets its name from. The community of Burnhamthorpe was around the intersection of what is today Burnhamthorpe Road and Dixie Road. Moses attended the Village Grammar School and then attended Victoria College in Toronto. He studied under Dr. Rolfe, where Moses was a silver medalist in 1858. He graduated from the Jefferson School of Medicine in Philadelphia, and after which Moses went to England, where he was attached to Guy's Hospital and became a member of the Royal College of Surgeons. He then returned to Canada, and he opened up his own medical practice in Burnhamthorpe in 1859. Shortly after his practice, he was appointed a professor of anatomy at Victoria College, along with his brother, Dr. William Aikens. William practiced in the city where Moses stayed here in historic Mississauga. Moses served in this capacity at Victoria College for 25 years, after which he continued as an associate professor. Dr. Moses was the first physician to be established in Burnhamthorpe Village, and really had a large sway across historic Peel County and into Halton and York counties as well. Was seen as a beloved rural family doctor, and he continued to practice for an incredible 58 years. So 58 years as a family doctor, or an early saddlebag doctor here in historic Mississauga. He labored diligently among the sick and suffering throughout Peel County, and there were likely very few homes that he did not visit in his long career. He steadfastly refused to take up a practice in the city, or to allow his university duties to take precedence over his service to his patients. In the 1880 smallpox epidemic, hundreds of patients formed queues in front of his office. And in the 1894 smallpox epidemic, he headed a board of doctors to cooperate with the medical officer in a vaccination campaign. One patient said of him, "He brought me into the world, but he won't let me out of it." Another patient recalled, "He was the doctor when my mother was born, he was the doctor when my sister was born, and he was the doctor when her baby was born." Dr. Moses had a genial personality, and it's quoted of him, "His appearance and manner inspired confidence. Nobody dared to die in the southern end of Peel County without his permission. And if he shook his head or looked too serious, all hope was gone." He blessed his patients. He was truly a beloved doctor. He seemed a kind of a kind paternalism, great sincerity, and personal interest, especially where children were concerned. He usually compounded his own medicines, and he took his oath very seriously. He was a charming man with the quiet and unobtrusive temperament of a scholar and a sense of humor. His physique was described as stocky and his constitution iron. Truly a son of the country and a son of a farmer. Dr. Moses made his rounds by buggy in the summer and by cutter in the winter, and in later years, as his eyesight failed, he had a driver take him on his rounds. He declined throughout his life to use telephones or automobiles. Dr. Moses knew horses well. His judgment was considered exemplary, and he was often sought out for advice from breeders and horse lovers alike. In 1915, in his 84th year, he quietly retired, and his eyesight failed rapidly. But again, his judgment was revered and sought by both professional brethren and by the general public right up to the end of his days. Dr. Aikens died at Burnhamthorpe in a property that he had lived in for over 60 years on December 19th of 1921, and he was buried at Britannia United Cemetery, which in turn has been relocated to Riverside Cemetery in Etobicoke. In addition to his prominence as a physician and a local doctor, he was a president of the Eaton's Loan Company Limited, director of the York Farmers Loan Company, and a breeder of fine horses. In his will, he bequeathed money to the Hospital for Sick Children, the Toronto General Hospital, Victoria College, and the University of Toronto, and the Salvation Army. And there is still a bursary in his name at the University of Toronto. Miss Stella Middlebrook of Malton gave this glowing tribute following his death in 1921. "It is therefore because of his great service to the county of his birth, and to the devotion of his duty, as a physician, as a professor, as a citizen, as a farmer, as a man of intellect, and a man of wealth, that I present Dr. Moses Henry Aikens for the laurels of the greatest son of Peel." Can't say a finer word from a beloved doctor who served this community for over 50 years. And again, served multiple generations of the community. So when you were looking back, Lauren, at the story of Moses, Dr. Moses, undoubtedly that is the connection to Dr. Moses Henry Aikens of Burnhamthorpe, right here in historic Mississauga. Incidentally, if you're wondering where he lived, his property was at the northeast corner of what is today Burnhamthorpe Road and Dixie Road. Again, lived there for over 60 years. So thank you, Lauren, for your question about Dr. Moses Henry Aikens, advocated for as the greatest son of Peel. Thank you for spending some time with us here at Ask a Historian. And remember, send in your questions and we'll explore the incredible stories and the history of the city of Mississauga each and every week here at Ask a Historian.